He's my friend, and he'll stay my friend. Doesn't matter what the other people say. He's my friend to the bitter end, even though the bitter end's a million years away.
What the hell is this?
It's classic mirth-making is what it is.
Said goodbye and walked away. Walked away from all I know.
Oh, he's been singing for 2 hours.
This couldn't have less to do with
the Titanic.
everybody. Welcome. Glad to see you here at last.
When it comes to the Unsinkable Molly Brown, I'm mostly just going to focus on the film that was based on the musical starring Debbie Reynolds and Harve Presnell, as opposed to the whole musical itself. I have listened to the soundtrack and I didn't really care for it, but I can't find a pro shot anywhere, so never mind. We'll just talk about the film. The film and the musical are very different beings, but they're still similar. Considering the 18 songs that are in the original Broadway cast recording, there's only 3 of them in the movie, and then they add 2 songs of their own. If you can hear sirens right now, there's something going on around here. I don't know, it sounds like we're in the bloody Bronx. I know the musical did get a few revisions later on down the line, but that wasn't before the 1964 movie came out, so we're just going to talk about the movie, the musical, the story, and stuff. By the way, I must apologise for the quality of the movie you're about to see. Not quality in terms of its badness, I mean its appearance. This movie is nearly 60 years old, okay, and clearly it's not been held in as high regard as that of like Oliver and Mary Poppins and West Side Story. The DVD I got did not have any restoration. The picture is grainier than the bread I have with my soup. And the Titanic stuff is pretty bad as well, but and it's one reason why there's a lot of frames in these videos. It's because there's some of them that don't have really good picture. The DVD I have, I tried to watch it and the picture is just sort of smushed like this. You can only like see a little slither and it makes Debbie Reynolds look like a hobbit. Of course, it is a no-brainer that the musical has literally no merit when it comes to historical accuracy. The only things that really line up with the life of the real Margaret Brown, the most famous Titanic survivor who had nothing to do with the ship's construction, is that she married J.J. Brown, who found his wealth mining for gold in Colorado, and she survived Titanic sinking. That's pretty much it. Everything else is fictionalised. So I guess the best use of this video is to tell you where the inaccuracies are before we get to the ship, which is probably the biggest inaccuracy of all. The first thing to note is that Molly Brown never called herself Molly. In fact, it was this musical that perpetuated this misconception. Molly Brown does sound more appealing than Margaret Brown, however, so I can understand them changing it just to make the title a little more fun. This misconception has been prolonged in later adaptations. For example, it was a running gag in SOS Titanic, where she is played by Cloris Leachman, who starred in the musical on Broadway.
Maggie! I beg your pardon, are you addressing me? How's it gonna look on the marquee when I make my legitimate stage debut? Maggie Brown? I'm sorry, Molly. He can leave his patent leathers outside my door any night. Maggie. Molly, Donna, Emma.
You too?
Oh, hold on a minute. No, I just thought I'd stick around for a while and watch the fun. My friend! Oh, down here, Emma, jump in! It's all right. I'll get the next one, Maggie. Molly! It's Molly! And ever get it right!
And of course, in the James Cameron version, she is once again called Molly, although I think that was more of a narrative shorthand, so the average filmgoer would recognise her. The movie opens with baby Molly being caught in the Colorado floods. She miraculously survives, and off-screen she's taken in by John Tobin, who raises her as his own daughter. Single dad representation right there. Molly grows up a tomboy who's good at hunting and fishing, and gets into fights with other boys. But she really wants to go to Denver, learn to read and write, and marry a rich man so she and her father can live in comfort. While Colorado has had many floods over the years, there doesn't appear to have been one around 1867, when Margaret Brown was born. Plus, she wasn't from Colorado, she was from Missouri, and happened to move to Colorado at 18. John Tobin was her biological father, and Margaret had a ton of siblings. Her aunt ran a grammar school, which she attended, and thus learned to read and write, and had a job in her spare time working for Garth's Tobacco Company. In the musical, when Molly goes to Leadville, she immediately gets a job as a singer and a barmaid in the Merry Christmas Saloon. It's basically your typical Wild Western saloon. She leads the group in a song that reminds me heavily of It's a Fine Life from Oliver, and it just makes me wish I was watching that instead.
Billy up to the bar, boys. Better have a few more. And never whirl with a three-toed girl or a discontented horrible example. If you don't mind having to deal with Fagin, it's a fine life. It's a fine life. Though disease threats threaten to bring the plague in, it's a fine life. It's a fine life.
On the way into town, she meets JJ Brown, who teaches her to read and write, and he's quite taken with her, promising never to say no to her. I should point out also that Harve Presnell, who plays JJ in the movie, also played the role on Broadway at the start of the show's run, and this is his film debut. And don't get me wrong, I love a good baritone. He was the saving grace of the Paint Your Wagon movie. Yes, that is a real movie.
Out here they got a name for rain, for wind and fire only. But when you're lost and all alone, there ain't no word but lonely.
He's dreamy.
And Presnell looks so much like David Bowie that it's borderline distracting. Any minute now he's just gonna start singing about the magic dance. In real life, Margaret worked in a department store. Rather than marry JJ because he was offering her the home of her dreams and security for her father, they married because they were in love. One of the positives of the movie is that Debbie Reynolds and Harve Presnell have good chemistry, and some of the jokes between them are actually kind of funny.
The rat sees the cat. The cat runs after the rat. This is my hat. What happened to the rat?
Cat ate it.
Oh. The little girl's name is Mary. The little boy's name is Tom. This is the barn. Mary and Tom are in the hayloft. This is Mary's mother. She is baking a pie. She better stop baking and go take a look on the barn.
JJ is a massive introvert, only comfortable with having a few friends from the same background as him, and only goes along with Molly's advances into high society out of love for her, but you can see his social awkwardness against Molly's brash personality, and yeah, that is quite amusing, especially when you identify with being that person who only has one friend at a party and you're just like, oh crap, I've been left alone, what do I do now? Moving on, one of the more comical stories surrounding Molly Brown was the story of how she hid a massive wad of cash in the stove for some reason or another, and then Mr. Brown, not knowing the money was in there, lit a fire and the money went up in smoke. This didn't actually happen. It was a joke spread by a Denver journalist called Caroline Bancroft, who would have been 12 at the time of the Titanic disaster. In truth, Margaret did keep her money in the stove, but this was money that was in coin form. It wasn't paper money. But when the real-life Margaret Brown heard this story, she liked the sound of it, and it's just been a key staple of her story ever since. It's kind of like Marie Antoinette's Let Them Eat Cake. She never said it historically, but it fits in so well to the public image, where the lines have been unalterably blurred. It is true that after the Browns struck it rich, they moved to Denver and bought a house on Pennsylvania Avenue, where the high society also lived. Because of their humble backgrounds, they struggled to fit in, and the old money types thought they were particularly vulgar. Another element I did like was just how fake the high society is in Denver. And then Hermione Baddeley comes in with her thick Irish accent and has a far more carefree way of living, as opposed to her socialite daughter, who keeps her mother away from her parties because her mother is an embarrassing reminder of where she came from. So the joke later on, where she actually gets a special announcement at the party alongside all the nobles and royals of Europe, is actually kind of hilarious.
Hello, Gladys.
The Browns then move to Europe to soak in more of the culture and become more refined. What the movie and the musical don't acknowledge is by this time they'd had 2 children by now. This is because the timeline has been abridged, to put it lightly, and it would have you believe that JJ and Molly were still relatively young by the time they get back together at the end and live happily ever after. In actual fact, Margaret was a grandmother by 1912. We also don't see Margaret's charity work for the underprivileged in Leadville and Denver. It's because of her that the United States has a juvenile court system. There is a scene where they're publicly giving money to the priest so he can build a school, but I think that's more just a way of trying to show off their wealth. After meeting a bunch of royals and nobles from all manner of countries, Molly and JJ return home to show off their fancy friends to the Denver elites. I think this was only a scene in the movie, however, and not actually in the musical, because the song that takes place here is only in the film, it's not in the soundtrack. The party ends very badly because their Leadville friends show up and they start to punch up after a rude comment's been spoken about Molly, and then it just goes insane. Well, it looks insane from an American perspective, but honestly this is just your average Weatherspoons on match day, particularly if it's a Man United and Liverpool match, in which case it's an absolute bloodbath. Molly wants to go back to Europe with her posh friends, but JJ wants to go back to Leadville, and they go their separate ways. Margaret and JJ were separated for about 3 years before the Titanic disaster. While the reason for their separation wasn't known, and they never fully reconciled, they were still on good terms with each other, and Margaret mourned his death. Eventually they were buried together in New York. The film and the musical rewrite this. So Molly is actually rushing home on the Titanic because she realised that she loved JJ all along, and that's why she was on the ship. In truth, it's because her grandchild was ill. And now we get to the Titanic stuff, and let me tell you, it is very, 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 very short. The movie had a super low budget, mind. It's practically incompatible to make a good Titanic movie when your budget is so low. That party scene earlier, they had to film all of it in one day because that was all they could afford. It's also probably why the sound editing is really bad. With a lot of movies, the audio is recorded separately as opposed to the microphone on the camera picking it up, and then they are both merged together afterwards. That's why clapperboards exist. I do it when I'm in front of the camera. In musicals, it's pretty much the same thing, except the actors tend to record their songs before they start filming, and then they lip sync to it afterwards, because the acoustics of a set is not the same as the acoustics of a stage, so you can easily get drowned out if you're singing on the set. But in the film, the sound is very jarring because there is no levelling, for lack of a better term. You can have characters run as far away to the other side of the set as possible, and it still sounds like they're right in front of you. So during that opening scene, it sounds like Debbie Reynolds is standing right in front of a microphone making cat noises. The exterior shots of the Titanic are cut from the Barbara Stanwyck movie. How do I pronounce that? Barbara Stanwyck or Stanek? Is the W silent? We'll find out. I don't know. Tell me in the comments. Maybe it's up for debate. The shots we see are the ship travelling across the Atlantic, followed by hitting the iceberg, followed by it slipping beneath the waves. Why yes, that movie was in black and white. And they don't even colour the clips in, so it's 1 second it's black and white Titanic, followed by fully in colour clips of Molly and the fellow passengers reacting. They couldn't even put Molly on the starboard side. How does ice get from a berg over the top of the ship to spill over onto the port deck? Much like Chewbacca living on Endor, it does not make sense. There is nothing about how Margaret Brown handled the disaster, really. You don't see her trying to encourage women onto lifeboats, or telling Lightoller they need another sailor, or taking the oar from Frederick Fleet and encouraging the other women to row with her, or her frequent arguments with Robert Hitchens over saving the survivors, nor do we see her actions on the Carpathia, and making sure that everyone is seen to as they leave the ship and being the final passenger to leave the Carpathia. Nor do we see her thank Captain Rostron for his help. Nope, none of that to be found. Instead, While they're in a lifeboat in the middle of the freezing Atlantic Ocean, Molly strips down to her undies so she can wrap the other passengers who are already wearing fur coats up to keep them warm, and she just rubs her arms a couple times and gets the women to sing while they're currently hysterical and despairing because their husbands might be dead. And though you can't see it, there are hundreds of people in the water screaming and slowly dying of hypothermia, and you're all stranded in the North Atlantic, remember? And you've probably got Rose's mum right next to you over there with her hands over her ears and trying to block out the sound of the screaming, and you're saying, "Everyone, let's sing! We gotta sing! We're gonna sing this song I did when I worked in a pub." And I'm just like, read the room, Molly. Read the room. Read the bloody ocean. Honestly, there is no emotional weight to these scenes. Everyone is overreacting to hell, and the scene is just too damn well lit. After this, we fade to Molly coming home to Denver, where she's being praised as a hero. But she didn't do anything besides slap a woman. Maybe that woman was Rose's mum, in which case she deserved it, but of course she comes home and finds the big brass bed of her dreams is in her room, and JJ is waiting for her. I guess that's a symbol of them meeting halfway when it comes to their lifestyles. Molly won't really give up her high society life, but at the same time, she's not going to be ashamed of her roots. Molly's been fully accepted in Denver society. Yay, it's a perfect ending. When this movie is over, you realise you walked a long way for a short drink of water. The film isn't unforgivably bad, and it does have its amusing moments, but overall it's just not very entertaining. And the story really undersells the achievements of the real-life Margaret Brown, who was remembered so fondly because she was a force of nature. She never stopped fighting, and she looked good doing it.
And they told me that he had said during his lifetime, Mrs. Brown could have gotten into any boat that night. Why did she have to step in mine?
So yeah, I know Debbie Reynolds fans are probably hating me right now because they remember her so fondly from Halloweentown, but I don't have that nostalgia, and this film is just not as unsinkable as the real-life woman around whom it revolves. That's another Titanic piece of media that's off the list. It was unlucky number 13, but it wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was. It's not actually that bad, but again, it's mostly because most of the time things are at the bottom of the list because the rest of the stuff is better. And the next one to come after this is a little bit obscure. It was lost for decades until 1998 when someone realised, oh, look what I have in my film collection. Anyway, here is the teaser for the next video. So if you want to guess what it is, or if you just already know what it's going to be, because I put the Titanic videos on Patreon as soon as they're finished in the order of which they go down the list. So if you want to see the next one on the list, then hop onto Patreon right now and become a member. You can get videos and scripts ahead of time. You can get your name in the credits like these lovely people. And the highest level contributors, my King and Queen Patrons, get a shout out in the credits. So here's my thank you to Alison Cuff, Larissa, Lady Eternal and Leslie Williams. You girls are amazing. And we're going to go on to the next one now. And I got to do something quickly because I'm wearing a corset right now. It's not very comfortable. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.